Welcome to Nobody Told Me. I'm Laura Owens.
And I'm Jan Black.
What factors determine our success? And how can our paths to success be made a little bit easier?
Our guest on this episode, Harvard Business School professor Laura Huang, has spent a great deal of time researching those questions and writing about them in the new book, Edge, Turning Adversity into Advantage. Professor, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Tell us what prompted you to write the book.
Well, I have been doing research for, over a decade on inequality and disadvantage and people who sort of feel underestimated, and had kept getting asked the question, like, what do we do about this? Are there strategies that we can take? Are there tactics that we can take to sort of level the playing field? And it sort of started to get depressing that all I was finding was these negative effects. And so the last couple of years, what I really tried to do was really do that, is find strategies and ways that people can think about leveling the playing field, flipping their, underestimated strengths upside down to succeed in both business and in life. And, a lot of it had to do with this premise that we're sort of taught from a really young age that success is about hard work. We take super successful people who are, CEOs or Olympians or world record holders, and we ask them, what's the secret to your success? And inevitably they'll mention hard work. And the issue is that we, at some point in our lives, realize that hard work doesn't necessarily speak for itself, even though we're told that. And even though hard work is critical, hard work alone isn't enough, and sort of leaves us frustrated when we put in that hard work and all that effort and don't see the outcomes and success. And so this book was really about, recognizing that a lot of times the outcomes and success is determined by signals and perceptions and the stereotypes of others. And if we can flip those stereotypes and obstacles in our favor, that's when we can find and create our own edge.
The title EDGE comes from an acronym that you created. What does that stand for?
Yeah, so at the same time that it sort of stands for, like, how do you think about finding and creating your own edge, it also is the framework that I've developed through my research, where the EDGE actually stands for the perspective on how you think about creating your own edge. So the E stands for enrich, and it's about knowing how you enrich and provide value in sort of any situation that you might be in. So knowing your strengths and knowing your weaknesses, knowing what might be underestimated in some cases. But it's really about this self-awareness and knowing what your superpowers or what your basic goods are. The problem is that we often don't have a chance to show how we enrich or provide value. We might not belong to the right networks, or we might not belong to the right groups, or we might just not have that chance to show how we provide value. And so the D stands for delight. And I talk a lot about how when we can delight somebody else, when we delight our counterpart, it's the equivalent of making that person sort of pause for a second and notice us in a different way, and maybe notice something that's counterintuitive or surprising that then allows you to then start a conversation or position yourself in a different way so that you can enrich and provide value. The G is for guide, which is even when you have delighted somebody and you're showing them how you enrich, it's really important to be able to guide the perceptions of others, to be able to redirect people to how they should see you and redirect them to who you authentically are. And it's so important because, in a lot of situations, we passively let others write our narrative rather than writing our own narrative and guiding others to how they should view us. And the final E is for effort and hard work. And that effort and hard work is what we often think comes first, that if you put in that hard work, that it'll speak for itself. But in fact, effort and hard work comes last. Because if you know how you enrich and how you delight and how you guide, that's when your effort and hard work actually work harder for you. And that's how you create those tailwinds for yourself.
How do you define edge?
There's this aspect to edge, which is recognizing that some people naturally have an advantage. And in a lot of situations, in some situations that might be us, but in a lot of situations that matter, it's not us. and that we can still be able to, even we don't naturally have that edge, be able to create one for ourselves. So it's about being able to flip circumstances in your favor so that whatever context you're in, whatever situation you're in, you do have that added piece, that position of, being able to make your own privilege. And the thing is, privilege has such a negative connotation to it. It has sort of this, it's like a loaded term. And the edge is really around, even when you're not given that position of privilege and other people may have that you're still able to make your own. And that's what really having your unique edge is about.
How have you had to work to turn adversity into advantage in your own life?
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of situations that I've faced all through my life. And what I talk about in the book is how life rhymes, right? There's this phrase I use a lot, which is that it's not necessarily adversity, but certainly there is that component of it, that we all face obstacles and constraints and adversity. But part of knowing how we enrich and provide value is understanding that, we may face situations in our lives maybe early on when we're children, and there's some feeling that we get that, either doesn't sit well with us or we're not sure what that is. And like later on in life, we have something else that happens to us that sort of reminds us of that same sort of feeling that, this doesn't seem right, or this isn't how I meant for it to be, or, and when we are able to sort of identify those sorts of situations, that's where we understand where we really do face our own personal adversity, as well as the adversity perhaps that other people may, other barriers that others create for ourselves, sometimes on purpose, sometimes just implicitly, while staying true to ourselves. It's that feeling of adversity, or that feeling that we have that allows us to know what we really care about and what's uncomfortable and what's vulnerable. And that's when we identify what really is our disadvantage or our adversity. Because, we can all think of the typical cast of characters, right? Adversity that we face because of our gender or our race or ethnicity or class or sexual orientation or religion or whatever the case might be. But as I say in the book, and as I, have found in my research, everyone has something. Whenever you walk into a room or walk into a new situation, people are making perceptions about you. They're making perceptions and attributions about you. And so it's really important to be able to hone your ability to know how you're seen so that you can then be able to flip that adversity and flip those perceptions in your favor.
Tell us a little bit more about how we can do that, how we can determine what the biases are that are working for and against us.
Yeah, this is something that, I get asked this question a lot, like, how do we do this? And are there, what are the 5 steps that I can take? And the thing about this is, I wish that there was some sort of a recipe or a protocol that I could say, here's how you figure this out. But it's really a perspective, and the more authentic and the more you make it yours, the better that you're, the more that you understand how you personally enrich and the way that you personally are perceived by others, the more the more powerful this is going to be for you. And I always say that this is something that everyone can learn, but it's not something that everyone is willing to learn, because in order to learn and hone this, it takes the ability to have humility and be able to understand that there will be failure and there will be drawdowns, and there's going to be lots of embarrassment. And what happens is, a lot of times people kind of face this embarrassment or face failure and they say, never again. I'm never going to put myself in that situation, never again. When in fact, when we face that sort of failure and that embarrassment, that's when we should be doubling down. That's where we learn. That's where we start to build these mental models and these prototypes and this intuition around how others see us. Because that's when we kind of can recognize, here's how others saw me, here's what made me uncomfortable, and so on and so forth.
We thank you so much for joining us on Nobody Told Me. And we have a question for you to think about. Is there something that interferes with your happiness or is preventing you from achieving your goals? BetterHelp Online Counseling is there for you.
BetterHelp allows you to connect with a professional counselor in a safe and private environment. Get help on your own time and at your own pace. You can schedule secure video or phone sessions, plus chat and text with your therapist.
BetterHelp has 3,000 licensed professional counselors in the U.S. who specialize in depression, stress, anxiety, relationships, sleeping, and trauma, anger, family conflicts, LGBT matters, grief, and self-esteem are just some of the issues you might want to discuss.
And of course, anything you share is completely confidential. And if you're not happy with your counselor for any reason, you can request a new one at any time at no additional charge.
BetterHelp is available worldwide, and you can start communicating by text, chat, phone, or video in under 24 hours. Financial aid is available for those who qualify.
It's secure, convenient, and professional. And best of all, it's a truly affordable option. Nobody Told Me listeners get 10% off their first month with discount code NOBODY.
So why not get started today? Go to betterhelp.com/nobody. Simply fill out a questionnaire to help them assess your needs and get matched with a counselor you'll love.
That's betterhelp.com/nobody.
If we're in a social situation where somebody is criticizing our past and making us feel kind of uncomfortable and we feel like the light's on us, how can we face that and how can we not be embarrassed?
Yeah, I mean, like part of it is embracing the fact that we do have to face some sort of embarrassment at some point. Like that's where they learn the most. But the guide piece is really important because that's what allows us to, that's what allows us to be able to stop and redirect and be able to, understand the best ways in which we can either recraft our message or the best way for somebody to see us in some particular light that is much more authentic to who we are.
When you talk about edge, you write in your book, Edge, that people underestimate how hard it is to get a foot in the door somewhere if you're an outsider. And they also underestimate how wide open the doors are once you're on the inside. Explain more about that.
Yeah, I mean, this goes back to the fact that some people just naturally have an advantage and have access to the plum projects or the right networks, and it speaks to the fact that when you are able to get your foot in the door, when you're able to surprise people and show something counterintuitive, that's where you're able to start a conversation. And what this is really about is starting that conversation. Especially when the odds are against you or you're facing some sort of adversity with your counterpart, when you're able to sort of just crack that door open a little bit and show them something surprising and counterintuitive about you, that's when they're able to, that's when they perhaps ask you a question because they're like, that's not what I expected. And, there's something there that I wasn't expecting, and they'll then ask a question that then allows you to answer and really shine. And that's sort of the power that this has, that when you're able to sort of really understand and improvise along with who that other person is, recognizing that other person is also going to be very unique from you with their own behaviors and traits and ways that they think about things, that's where we really kind of see the power of this.
In the world we live in today, I feel like a lot of millennials, people of my generation and your generation, go into an interview and try and do as much research as they can into the person who is going to be interviewing them and try and find out what they like and dislike. And we try and mimic their behaviors and make them their best qualities into our qualities. How can we come off brilliantly in an interview, get that foot in the door by not just selling ourselves and our accomplishments, but really trying to show our true edge?
Yeah, I mean, there's two pieces to that. Like, one piece of that is like sometimes people say to me, well, like this feels so strategic, like it feels almost manipulative. Like
Yeah.
that I'm like managing impressions, and I see other people, that have like are kissing up to the boss or and that doesn't sit well. It feels almost gross, and I don't want to be that person. And, I think that's sort of what you're alluding to, is that, like, how do we actually do this when we feel like there's this stigma attached to that? And what I tell people is that, this is actually something very different from managing impressions. It's actually the opposite of being strategic or manipulative, because what you're really doing is showing them a version of, you're guiding them to who you authentically are. And the alternative is that people will have first impressions of you, and people will be making attributions about you. And then those attributions will inevitably be wrong in some sort of way. And so that you then have the hurdle or the burden of actually having to switch those. It's much more authentic to go in and be showing them, how you do enrich and provide value, so that you can have that deeper, richer relationship with that person. The other part of that is that, when we go into situations, we sometimes don't always, think about what that other person is thinking or what their perceptions of us are. We go in with maybe 5 bullet points of the things of our strongest suits that we want to make sure that they know. Or when we know that the odds are against us, we're going to convince them of these things. And I have such compelling points, and I'm going to go in there and then I'm just going to change their mind. And the issue is that, that's when we sort of often go in there with an advocate, like we're advocating for ourselves. And it's often when we feel the most passionate or the strongest about something that we do that. We also come on the strongest. And in fact, that puts the other person in this sort of confrontational mode, where once you say something, they're already thinking of their counter arguments, and they're thinking of ways, because they're thinking of their own points and their own, 5 things that they want to say. Instead, sometimes if you go in, for example, with more of an inquisitive and more of an inquiring kind of stance, and you orient yourself by saying, help me understand what your strategy is here, or help me understand how it is that you think X and I sort of think Y, and sort of acknowledging that there is this gap in between your beliefs, or a gap in between what you think. And when you go in with much more of that inquisitive standpoint, you start that conversation. You start that conversation that I was talking about before, where you're much more likely to be asking that person questions. They're more likely to be asking you questions, and you're able to have that deeper, richer interpersonal interaction.
Our Nobody Told Me conversation continues in just a minute, but first, have you heard about ROTHY's? They're the company making stylish shoes for women and girls out of recycled plastic water bottles.
ROTHY shoes come in an ever-changing, exciting variety of colors, prints, and patterns. I love the look and feel of my black pointed-toe flats by ROTHY's, and would never have guessed that they're made out of repurposed plastic water bottles.
Like mother, like daughter. I also own the ROTHY's black pointed toe flats, and they are so comfortable. They're fully machine washable, and I wear them with everything from leggings to dresses and skirts.
ROTHY's flats, loafers, and sneakers always come with free shipping and free returns and exchanges. There's no risk, so there's no reason not to try them. Do what we did and check out all the amazing styles right now at rothys.com/NTM. The website is great, and that's where you can learn all about the shoes and the company behind them.
Go to rothys.com/NTM to get your new flats. Comfort, style, and sustainability. These are the shoes you've been waiting for.
Head to rothys.com/NTM today. You've also researched gut feel. What is that? What is gut feel?
Yeah, I mean, the thing about gut feel, so I've looked at gut feel especially in terms of how we make decisions in situations where there's a lot of where there's extreme uncertainty and extreme complexity. And, when we're making decisions and we can be assigning probabilistic, outcomes and probabilities to something, that's not where gut feel is going to be the most valuable. So what I've really looked at is how do we think about where our gut feel is most useful and what does that actually mean? And so when we talk about gut feel, we often, most people immediately think about how it's something that's subconscious or fast or emotional. But in fact, our gut feel is something that's both cognitive and emotional. Like it's based on our patterns and our mental models and prototypes and exemplars that we've seen in our past. And so what I talk about in terms of how the gut feel piece is really critical for both understanding yourself and understanding your counterpart and understanding how you interact in our socially interconnected world. And so it's something that we can absolutely hone. We can hone knowing where in some contexts we might want to be very analytical and data-driven. And in other contexts, we might, for example, want to not be considering the data at all and instead be relying very much on our intuition. And we can hone this, through some of the things that we've already talked about in terms of, the experiences and understanding that that life rhymes. And I talk about a whole host of different strategies that you can think about of how to hone this. But it's critical not just in terms of the decisions we make, but also in the ways in which we interact with others.
I love the piece about how investors decide where they're going to put their money into. How do they make those decisions?
Yeah, so some of my initial research on gut feel looked at how investors decide which startup companies to invest in. So I looked at angel investors and venture capitalists and how they, make their investment decisions. And, that is a particular context where there is a lot of uncertainty and a lot of unknowability. And what I found was that investors who use their gut feel do much better at identifying the home runs, those companies that are going to be extraordinarily profitable, but also those companies that are going to be extraordinarily, unprofitable. So they avoid those companies. And so their gut feel wasn't necessarily better on an aggregate basis in terms of each and every investment being, a positive investment. But they were much more likely to have maybe some losses, some gains, but also identify those extraordinarily profitable home run hitting startups. And the reason for that is because, when these investors were investing, those that used their gut feel were ones that were able to pinpoint something, some piece of this company or a piece of that individual that was like a diamond in the rough. And instead of looking for evidence and data around whether or not this was going to be a profitable startup, they were able to sort of hone in on something that was unidentifiable or that they couldn't articulate. In fact, when I made those same investors, in some instances, explain to other people or use data to kind of back up that decision, the effect went away. They talked themselves out of those decisions. And so part of this is knowing that, in some situations you want to go in and trusting that intuition and whatever those feelings are, rather than engaging in that sort of decision making, but then having that post hoc process where you look for the data to support that gut feel.
The Palm Beach Masters Series is equestrian sport at its finest.
The world's best show jumping athletes will gather at Deer Ridge Farms in Wellington, Florida, starting January 28th.
History will be made with the world's top-ranked horses and riders slated to compete at 3 world-class events: the World Cup, Nations Cup, and Palm Beach Open.
The stakes are heightened with tickets to the Olympic Games on the line. Wave your flag and cheer on your nation.
Get to know the only sport where men and women compete as equals. Experience the incredible partnership between riders and their horses.
It all happens at Deer Ridge Farms, a picturesque setting in the heart of South Florida.
Watch wall-to-wall coverage of the 2020 Palm Beach Masters Series online.
Visit palmbeachmasters.com and be a part of the action.
The phenomenally successful Warren Buffett is one of the people you talk about in your book, Edge. What have you learned about him and how he's used edge to his advantage or gut feel?
He uses it quite a bit. I mean, he's somebody who has a blend of knowing when to be much more analytical and much more methodical, and when to sort of go for the intuitive gut-based decisions. Now, I mean, it's easier when you sort of are someone like Warren Buffett and you build yourself a portfolio to sort of go off of it. But, it does speak to this. It does speak to the fact that it's, again, those failures. Like when you have that space to fail, when you have that space to make those embarrassingly wrong decisions, that's when you're actually cultivating this and developing this. And that's something that, Warren Buffett was able to do really well. Something I talk a lot about in the book also is that, one of the reasons why we don't do that, we're not able to do that, is that when we do have those instances of failure, or when we have those instances where somebody has wronged us, and, I ask my students sometimes, like, okay, think of a situation that still bothers you, years later, or decades later, where someone wronged you, or some situation was unfair, and within seconds, people can think of something that still bugs them, that still nags them, and kind of gives them a chip on their shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
And those situations tend to make us bitter and jaded, and like we remember those, and those are the situations that we're like, never again will we let somebody do that, or never again will we put ourselves in a situation like that. And I talk a lot in the book about how those are the situations that we should be not embracing, because they're obviously horrendous situations, but thinking about, how is this something that's making me bitter, or is this something that's making me better? And how can I, and when we do start to feel that bitterness, asking ourselves, how can I let this make me better? How can I use this to make me better? And, that's something that I think individuals like Warren Buffett and some of the other, folks that I talk about in the book are able to do. And, what I tried to do in the book was give lots of examples and tell lots of stories about people who are not, well-known, famous figures. I mean, there's a couple, I talk about folks like Warren Buffett, but the majority of the stories that I tell and the individuals that I talk about are just ordinary, everyday people who have had to face adversity and have had to figure out how to flip their adversity around and create their own advantage. And I think that's sort of what I tried really hard to do, because not that those well-known people haven't faced adversity, they certainly have, but these are a lot of this is how do we in that moment, or how do we as ordinary everyday individuals approach these situations. And I think that's a huge piece of also thinking about how that bitterness sometimes overwhelms us, rather than using that to make us better.
Yeah, and you even talk about how the everyday patient can use this in their interactions with their doctors in order to kind of influence their own health outcomes. How is that?
Yeah, I mean, the research that I did in terms of healthcare and it was funny, because I was, as I mentioned, I've been doing research for years on disadvantage and inequality and bias and stereotypes. That project was actually, it started because I was thinking, and my co-authors and I were like, what's a context in which there should be no disadvantage? There should be no impact of signals and perceptions and subtleties. And we were like, emergency rooms, right? If you're in an emergency room and you're having a heart attack, the doctor's only job is to save your life, right? There should be no differences based on something, things like gender or race or ethnicity, controlling for other factors, right? Like your prior health and your, other disease states and all that sort of stuff. Like the doctor should be saving every single person's life. And in fact, when we started doing research in that area, we found that, again, that subtle signals and perceptions were impacting who who would live and who would die. And we found that, for example, women were more likely to die from heart attacks when they were being treated by male physicians. And we looked at things like communication and routines and learning and all of these sorts of things. And so it's not just outcomes that are in the business world, like promotions and raises and getting hired into certain positions, or it's also very applicable to life, where you do have to redirect and guide and think about how you advocate for yourself in these sorts of settings as well.
And Professor, I know on your website you have a quiz, a Find Your Edge quiz. Can you give us a thumbnail sketch as to what we'll find there?
I do. It's a really fun quiz, just 10 questions. And what it does is based on my research, it gives you an edge quotient. It's basically how prepared are you to find and create your own edge. And so then it sort of suggests areas in which, hey, you've really got a strong sense of how you enrich and provide value, but here's some ways to think about how you might, integrate that into delighting others. Or you're really great at guiding and redirecting, but, maybe think about how you can really hone in on your superpowers to be able to guide them even more authentically to who you are. So it provides this quotient for how equipped you are to find and create your own edge. And there's also on my website a downloadable guide, which is a 10 to 15 page quick guide with strategies and tactics that you can use to hone your ability to enrich, delight, guide, and then make that effort go further.
And as you know, our show is called Nobody Told Me. So at the end of each episode, we ask our guests, what is your Nobody Told Me lesson? And there's no doubt that Edge is filled with plenty of them. But what's your favorite? What's the Nobody Told Me lesson that you learned about personal success or edge that you find to be the most valuable?
I think one of the things that I write about in the book that nobody told me was that nobody told me that be yourself is actually horrible advice.
Wow.
I read that in the book and I thought that was awesome. I actually wrote that down as a quote.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean that you're being somebody else. It means you are being who you are, but you're being all of the different versions of yourself. That you recognize that we are complicated and varied individuals, and that it's totally okay to embrace all of those versions of yourself. Because, we give this advice like, go into an interview, just be yourself. You're giving a big presentation, just be yourself. You're going on a date, just be yourself. But, we're so different and we're so complicated and varied. And be yourself really is that advice only, sort of applies when you're by yourself in a room by yourself. As soon as you are interacting with somebody else, there's all of these different aspects and all of these different facets of you that need to and should come out.
And how can people connect with you on social media and the internet? And tell us about your website, too.
Sure. My website is laurahuang.net. So Laura, my last name is HUANG.net. And then I'm on social, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook. My Twitter and Instagram handle is Laura Huang, LA.
All right, super. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been really informational and helpful.
Great, good. Thanks so much, guys.
Our thanks to Harvard Business School professor Laura Huang, author of the new book, Edge, Turning Adversity into Advantage. And again, her website is laurahuang.net, and that's LauraHuang.net. I'm Jan Black.
And I'm Laura Owens.
You're listening to Nobody Told Me. Thank you so much for joining us.